Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national television channel about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and global and regional developments that have an impact on India's rise in the world. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking a look at the new year 2024, the major international political and economic scenarios that await us in 2024, and India's major challenges and opportunities in 2024 as it tries to navigate a difficult time. And to discuss this, let me introduce you to a very, very honored and erudite guest who's joining me today in the studio, Dr. C. Raja Mohan.
Thank you.
Dr. C. Raja Mohan is one of India's foremost thinkers on geopolitical issues and international matters. He is a columnist with the Indian Express. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
Raja, 2024, always every new year comes with hopes, but then there's a carry forward of the baggage from the previous year or the previous decade and so on. So in that sense, if you look at the global horizon, things are not looking so rosy. And if you take a big picture view, there's so many armed conflicts going on. We have raging wars in Europe and in West Asia or the Middle East, and potentially wars even in East Asia around the Taiwan or the South China Sea disputes. So if you were to look at the new year and apprise it, probably the first thing that comes to mind is it's a dangerous time, and many people are of the view that the deterrence mechanisms have broken down and aggressors are on the move. Or it seems like the offensive has the advantage. Or people think that it's better to strike now. A lot of revisionist powers. So I'd like you to, first start with the year as it begins and what you think are the major risks and challenges in this kind of a dangerous situation.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the world is passing through a difficult period. The assumption that there was going to be a stable order, and within that framework where there was a relative peace, where economic integration, economic cooperation could take place. I mean, we've had that kind of a situation, say largely from 1990s to recently, while we had incidents like in Afghanistan, the attacks on US 9/11. So there was no major power war. There was no direct confrontation between major powers. But today, I think we are really seeing such a situation unfold. So at least three major theaters in the world. In Europe, the crisis in Ukraine that began, really the Russia questioning the existing order, the need for Russia to rethink the region, the agreements that Russia had with the West, which at the end of the Cold War, those have collapsed. So Russia seeks a revision of the existing system in its favor. So you have in Europe, so that crisis is yet to be resolved. And
it's 2 years and the war continues.
War continues, and I think prospects look pretty grim. The second is in Asian theater closer to us. We see that the China too is a revisionist power. China sees the need, what it sees as the importance of integrating Taiwan. And in the past, Chinese leaders had said they will not use force to unify Taiwan. But today, Xi Jinping does not rule out the use of force. So that has pit the Americans and the Chinese directly to each other. And then meanwhile, beyond the Taiwan question, China is also muscling in to take territory from the Philippines, from Vietnam in the South China Sea, on the Himalayas. So I think the Chinese assertiveness on territorial issues is creating problems in Asia. Now, until now, we thought Middle East was relatively tranquil. There was no major conflagration. But at the end of 2023, we saw the attack on Israel from Gaza by Hamas, the Israeli response, which has put the region into a real massive crisis. Not only in terms of the humanitarian tragedy that's unfolding in Gaza, but there's also now the war is widening. We see the Houthis in Yemen attacking international shipping. And we have actually Hezbollah in
opening other fronts.
Other fronts. So I think the existing order, which seemed through Abraham Accords, through Arab-Israeli reconciliation, through greater economic integration, we thought Middle East was going on a different path. But that too has broken down. So I would say the three major theaters, that is Europe, Middle East and Asia, we have actually, the old order is breaking down. A deterrence, as you rightly said, has broken down under the serious crisis in all the three regions.
And Raja, the instability, I mean, you're a scholar of international relations. It looks like there is a fundamental structural issue. We call it sometimes power transition, that, basically we are moving away from first we moved away from unipolar to bipolar because the Chinese become a great power, and now it's a kind of emerging multipolar kind of situation where we are moving forward, with India being one of the new power centers that's emerging. So in that kind of scenario, the theory says that it will be violent, it will be disorderly, and there will be blood. So it looks like we are in that kind of a delicate phase. So year 2024 and even the years going forward, this whole decade possibly could be that kind of adjustment, isn't it? So it's like the tectonic plates underneath the world politics are shifting, and it's really in that kind of situation where we have to think about what are the prospects for security.
Absolutely. I mean, my sense is that if you look at just the numbers of economic size, the US is still the number one power. In terms, it still has 25% of the world's GDP. It still outspends all other players, on military spending. So that way, and the technological capabilities, US is still the number one. But what we've seen happen actually in the last few years is, one, there's a debate within the US of how to use power. You have one section saying, look, let's pull back. You have others talking about internationalism. So that was the argument between Trump. So in a sense, the problem with the US is, this thing of running the world seems to be at least getting tiring for at least some sections.
Yeah.
So there is an internal argument which is beginning to constrain the US. And I think if Mr. Trump is re-elected president of the United States at the end of this year,
this year,
yeah, there's a reasonable possibility. And I think that internal contradiction within the US will sharpen. Externally, I would say China and Russia have gotten closer together, while at one point both of them were not willing to challenge the US domination of the international system. China has grown. It is ready to challenge the US-led order, at least in Asia, if not in the world level. And China and Russia to find common ground to contest the US primacy. So there is an alliance structure that has come. But I would say the US still has some strengths. Externally, Europe is still dependent on the United States. But it's the Middle East where the notion that you can simply structure peace within a region without addressing the demands of large section of people. I mean, you can't satisfy everyone in any order, as you know. But I think the hidden contradictions within the Middle East, between what's happening within Israel, is it willing to have a two-state Israel? Within, how does it treat its own Arab minority? Can you have a two-state solution in Palestine? These issues were largely kept aside because the rapprochement that was unfolding between Israel and the Gulf Arabs, but that is now broken down. So my sense is that smaller guys are finding ways to challenge, for example, Houthis, who are a non-state actor. By simply attacking the Red Sea shipping.
Yeah, even though there is a asymmetry, they are able to use that to their advantage.
So here I think the notion of a hybrid war, the notion of grey zone tactics. So we're seeing new forms of warfare, and the new technologies are actually making it easier. For example, the drone warfare, which is new. We've seen it applied in the Ukraine war. Now we're seeing it in the Red Sea. So I think new technologies are also making it easy for small guys to challenge the dominance of the big guys. So the big guys are going to take some time to adapt to this. So I think we are in a period of transition, as you rightly said.
And Raja, talking of the big guys, I mean, they have avoided direct confrontation, but in all these theaters, one way of looking at them these are like proxy, wars where China, Russia, US, they're all supporting different groups.
In fact, the Russians say that the war in Ukraine is with the collective West.
So it's in that context, I mean, what do you see the risks of us sliding into actually like even a great power war? I mean, they usually try to avoid it. Throughout the Cold War, there were some hair-raising, moments, but they avoided all-out, conflict, direct conflict. But if the Chinese attack Taiwan in 2024, I mean, can the US just sit back and watch? I mean, or will they only indirectly try and arm and support Taiwan? Or I mean, these are all real questions. They are no longer hypothetical because of Xi Jinping and their ambition, the aggression, and the expansionism. So that sense, even with the naval skirmishes that we are seeing in the Indo-Pacific, it looks like great powers could also potentially have clashes. I mean, and that sends us into a different dimension altogether. It's almost 80 years since a world war ended. But if great powers fight, it becomes a world war, right? So that do you foresee that kind of like a conventional type of war? Although there are clear, guardrails against all-out war, but still, I mean, that's also a risk possibly. We spoke about the asymmetrical. What about the mainstream, the big guys fighting?
No, absolutely. I think in Ukraine, for example, the Biden administration was consciously avoiding a direct confrontation with Russia because of the nuclear factor, because of NATO getting involved, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So I think what the West has supported Ukraine, gave them a lot of assistance, but avoided directly participating in the military conflict with Russia. But Russia, of course, sees this as actually a political conflict with the West, and the West backed Ukraine attacking them. So far, they've managed to avoid a direct confrontation, but in 2024, we don't know, where this will go. But in the case of Taiwan, it's much more direct, where the Chinese see it as a national integration issue, while the US insists on a peaceful reunification. And if Taiwan goes, much of the US standing in Asia will be fundamentally challenged. So therefore, I think there is a real danger.
The balance of power in Asia will be completely altered against US interests,
Absolutely.
Right?
So I think that's the reason why the US is strengthening alliances with Japan, with South Korea, with Australia, with even brought in the United Kingdom into the Indo-Pacific. AUKUS, and then it's also trying to get closer to India through the Quad. So there are many forms are being developed to prevent such an outcome. But there's no guarantee that a China Xi Jinping takes risks like President Putin did. We could be in a very different place in 2024.
Very different place. Raja, coming to Indian security and India's interests now, obviously we have been trying to use our strategic partnerships to the maximum, to our advantage, diverse range of partners, Western countries, but also Russia on the other side, and at the same time try and avoid war. I mean, we don't want war with China, even though they have been provoking us. So, and with Pakistan, of course, it's a weakened neighbor, but there's always the risk that they will, use their jihadist proxies to carry out some sensational attack on Indian interests. So, for us in India, given this context that we have laid out, this power transition and the instability, how should we, deter our adversaries, and how should we secure ourselves, you think, in this new year?
No, on the China question, actually, that has been our principal problem. I mean, if you look at last decade, we had at least 4 major crises with China. The 2013 border crisis, we had another one in 2014. Then we had the Doklam conflict on the India-China-Bhutan border in 2017. And then 2020 at Galwan. And we're still a long way from actually resolving what happened in 2020. So I think it is quite clear the Chinese see no room for compromise. They claim these territories and they insist that they would take them back. So we are in for a long haul with the Chinese. And India, for example, now we are into the 4th winter, 60,000 troops deployed at 17,000 feet. So this really one of the most challenging wars. And then meanwhile, we also have India-China rivalry now in the Indian Ocean. Chinese presence in Sri Lanka, increasingly with, we should also expect the new government in Maldives, which is making friendly noises towards China. And I'm not even talking about Pakistan, where actually China is at historically places. And then we are also seeing in Burma, where the Burmese army is finding it hard to control the Northern Territory. And the Chinese who are bordered from the north, their role in the northern Burma is increasing. So I think whichever way we look at it, as China's power grows,
Yeah.
I think their impact on our neighborhood is going to grow, and dealing with that at the military level, at the political level, at the diplomatic level will be a major challenge for India in the 2024 and beyond.
Yes, and Raja, you talked about neighborhood. We have a few elections. Of course, Indian election is, of course, primary concern for our own people. But then in the region, you have a Bangladesh election, you have a Pakistan election, and Nepal continues to have, like a revolving door, frequently governments coming in and going out. So in that context, neighborhood, sometimes we tend to think of it not as a problem because barring Pakistan, we are okay with most countries. But then there could be upsets here and there, or there could be realignments based on these electoral developments in these countries, especially radical forces. I mean, sometimes because of the overwhelming problem of China, we seem to sometimes keep aside the jihadist threat, which is always lurking. And the violence we see in Kashmir Valley, it could escalate and all those things. So in that context, if there's a crisis, this year, 2024, we have shown in the Narendra Modi era that our strategic culture has become more assertive, and we retaliate hard, and we try and increase the costs of terror. But that aspect, and given the Chinese presence now and the client relationship that the Pakistanis, we see every passing year that Pakistan is becoming more and more supine and dependent on China. So that duo, the two front situation, all those things, should we be worried and looking out for that, or do you think we need not worry about the Pakistanis that much?
No, there's no question. I mean, that we have to keep very vigilant eye on Pakistan. You rightly said in the beginning that, look, Pakistan today is much weaker in comparison to India. For example, India's GDP at $3.7 trillion. Well, Pakistan's GDP is at 3.4. They're struggling. Very low growth rates, high population growth rates. So Pakistan is certainly weakened. That doesn't mean it can't create problems for you. In a sense, you could even argue because it's becoming weaker on the conventional military front or the economic front, it will try tactics which, like a weaker party does. In fact, that they might actually use more terror. The last 3 years, I would say, the February 2021 ceasefire has largely held, but we're seeing signs that the ceasefire with Pakistan is breaking down. We don't know how the elections will play out in Pakistan. While Mr. Nawaz Sharif, some people expect him to become Prime Minister again. He's saying nice things about India, but he's always said nice things about India. But it's not clear where the new army chief wants to take Pakistan. So there is always that danger. And now with China actually egging on Pakistan to do some things, that again is a possibility. But more than Pakistan, I think with the other countries too, we often forget that they have their own politics.
Yeah, local.
So their internal dynamic, that when regimes change in the neighborhood, we see it in Maldives. When the government has changed, their policies have altered dramatically.
Or in Sri Lanka, Nepal, it keeps happening.
So I think that problem, is a persistent one. That while India's overall relationships, I would say in the region outside of Pakistan have significantly improved. With Bangladesh, we have a better trading relationship, better cooperation. Same with Nepal. So overall at one level, because India is also rising, there is more engagement, there's more cooperation, there's more connectivity. But at the same time, the internal issues within each of these countries have a bearing on how they deal with India. But that is something India has to learn to manage in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah. And Raja, talking of grand strategy now, I mean, this multi-alignment has seemingly worked. But my favorite strategy question is, will it be sufficient going forward, or will the strategic partnerships be sufficient, or will we have to start thinking along alliance terms, given the balance of power in Asia shifting with especially the Chinese trying to reorder the place. So in this new year, do you think, I mean, some of our strategic partnerships are almost, they sound like quasi-alliances only, in some forms, especially the military and defense cooperation. Clearly, we need to invest much more and to advance those, right? I mean, to the extent possible, obviously short of alliance which we are not comfortable with. And those will be, I think, the key going forward, isn't it? The big bilaterals that we have with our Quad partners, with France, with Israel, with UAE, I mean, these countries, with Russia, all these are going to matter a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you are right in saying that, look, India has a, allergy to formal military alliances. But in the past, we have done, alliance-like relationships, because what India had with the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
In
1971.
1971, I mean, that was an alliance-like relationship. But as India becomes stronger, the need to have formal alliances in a way has declined. But at the same time, the gap between India and China has dramatically grown. Just as the gap between India and Pakistan has grown, China's GDP is still 5 times bigger than India's. China spends 5 times more than India on defense. So we have a challenge from China. That's the reason why we have the Quad, I mean, which is really, well, it's not an alliance, it is actually creating grounds for more collaboration with Japan, with Australia, with the US in the region, so that you create a structure in which the Chinese power can be managed. So while we sit in the Quad, doesn't mean we have no independent role in the region. India does its own independent engagement with countries of ASEAN, expanding security cooperation, because India has more resources today. Because India also says, look, it is a security provider within the Indian Ocean. But there are going to be problems. For example, the attack on Indian shipping in the Red Sea and in the Arabian Sea means that, look, to keep saying we are non-aligned, we are multi-aligned, makes no meaning when, how do you protect your shipping? Because your oil prices will go up, insurance rates are already going up. So the question is, how do I protect my interest in the ocean? Which means you have to work with others. The saying,
more proactively than before.
More proactively. That means we have to coordinate more with like-minded countries. We have to work with other navies to protect, because no country can do it alone.
Correct.
So I think the need for coalitions, for partnerships, will continue to grow, including in the military domain, because we thought we won't talk about it, we don't need it. But I think as the challenges mount, that the someone is attacking with drones of India ships coming to India, so that you can't just simply say I don't do this kind of stuff. So I think the circumstances are going to force India to engage more militarily and with like-minded coalitions where we have to deal with these challenges.
Lastly, Raja, economics always matters. It's the latent power which you can convert into military and other forms of power, as we know. And India is in a sweet spot. India is doing very well. It's the fastest growing major economy. Even within G20, everyone looks up to India now as the kind of the bellwether which will determine the future of the global economy, while the Chinese are slowing down, relatively speaking. So clearly, it is in our interest to ensure that this growth continues, uninterrupted. And that's why avoid wars and those kind of things. But at the same time, we need to also invest more in our defense capabilities going forward with the rising GDP growth and all those things. So how would you say we should defend our economic interests through foreign policy in this new year?
No, absolutely. I think India is doing very well economically. So that's a great advantage, because without economy, there's nothing else. Everything else is really falls apart if you don't have a strong economy. There, I think India's high growth rate gives it an option to do a lot more things. For example, your capacity to aid and assist your neighbors, to ability to work with countries in Africa and in Asia. And above all, you have resources to devote to security cooperation and creating stronger national security institutions. But this also means doing major reforms. It's not just throwing money. This is where I think we saw the Modi government do some very interesting things in the last couple of years. For example, the reform of the Higher Defense Organization, the creation of the CDS, the focus on production of weapons at home, the privatization of parts of defense industry, the privatization of space sector. So I think the government is beginning to do things, but I think the agenda of a stronger domestic defense industrial base, the agenda for reforming the military in terms of how do you reduce the burden of pensions, etc., so that you're not taking money and just all going into maintaining staff. So these issues, I think the reform agenda is there, but I think that needs to be deepened much more. So I think Economic reforms are paying off, but I think the security reforms, we've just begun that process, and a lot more needs to be done on that process.
And we just have time to slip in one more on foreign economic policy. I mean, the free trade agreements you've warmed up to them last few years, and more are on the anvil in 2024 are being negotiated. These all bode well because historically we have been protectionist and defensive about it. But now increasingly what our leaders call like-minded countries, the economics is also being aligned more closer with the geopolitics, and the two seem to be going together, and you have written about this also. How that seems like a growth area where we should invest more, right? I mean, it's not just about finding the best comparative advantage and doing trade with whoever, but rather with those who are politically and geopolitically closer to us. And that trend of geoeconomics, in our foreign policy, I think will accelerate this year, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think my sense is we made some beginning with Australia, with United Arab Emirates. There are negotiations going on with UK, with Europe. But trade agreements are never easy because there's so many domestic constituencies which are involved. But my sense is the government now needs to complete some of these agreements. For example, with Europe, with the UK, with I believe we are very close, but there's still some outstanding issues. The Gulf as a whole wants to do more trade cooperation with India. So I think, but the problem is that each time there will be a lot of resistance internally because there's too many sectors. Bangladesh, for example, which is a major trading partner for India. How do we create a more integrated economic cooperation with Bangladesh that is within the region? So all these issues, I think, will come up to the fore in this year, in 2024, and going beyond 24 as well.
Right. So viewers, this conversation with Dr. C. Rajamohan is showing us that 2024 is going to be full of challenges, but India is up to the task. India does know the scenario, the way it's been unfolding, and is preparing to meet the threats and the risks, but also going forward with a grand strategy to enhance our economic and military power in the world so that we become this leading power, as our Prime Minister calls it. Let me thank Dr. C. Rajamohan for always highly intellectually stimulating discussion. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Viewers, I want to wish you a happy new year 2024, but we'll keep our eyes on the ball of global developments and politics because they have a direct impact on India's future trajectory and direction. The way we are evolving as a great power depends very much on these global factors, and we need to consider them when we make our own strategy. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.